Alright, before I start this off, I just want to remind you guys, if you like the video, if you like what I do, make sure you sub to the channel and make sure you hit the notification button. Alright, so actually getting into what I want to talk about. This video is about max build. And what I mean by that is, having your maxed out shade watch, having your maxed out gear, having your maxed out weapon, just maxed out mods, maxed out everything. And having these maxed out things so you can basically determine what the best builds are, because there is always going to be one build or at least one setup of a build that offers more damage or has more armor or does more armor regen. There's going to be something that is better than something else. It is just a fact of this type of game. And that's kind of what I'm going to be getting into. Now, before I get into the actual builds and what I've kind of been testing out, I want to take the time to actually mention this and make sure people understand. Crits are good, but they are not everything. 40% of your bullets are not going to be crits if you have the maxed out crit chance. This means that is a huge potential source of damage that most people are often overlooking or not calculating. If you are, watching somebody on YouTube, or you are just, yourself testing out builds and you're only looking at crits and that is the only thing that you're actually taking into consideration, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. You are not maximizing your build properly because, like I just said, 40% of your shots are not going to be crits, which means that 40% of your bullets could be incredibly weak and you have no idea about it. Now, just to build on that, if you're one of the people that is obsessed with having over 200% crit damage, that is your qualification for playing with someone in the raid. They have to have 200% crit damage or higher. That's fine. You can make whatever you want, but that doesn't make your build the best. Having more crit doesn't mean much if your build is garbage. There's plenty of ways that you can have over 200% critical hit damage, but it doesn't mean your build's any good. It doesn't mean your build's effective or maximized. The other side to this is, there are plenty of people I have seen who have massive amounts of critical hit damage and they don't have anywhere near 60% crit chance. There is no faster way to kill your damage than to have 20% crit chance and 200% critical hit damage. Like, that is just a ridiculous joke. It is terrible and it is dumb. So make sure you're paying attention to that. If you're one of these people who's just investing straight into critical hit damage and no chance, you honestly are doing no damage. Alright, and the last thing I want to talk about before I explain some of these builds. I've mentioned this before, and I guess I need to mention it again, but 3-piece gear sets, especially in regards to DPS builds, are no good. Now, there's some uses for, like if you want to have like an armor build, a regen build, or maybe some of the skill builds, they can benefit a little bit from having 3 pieces. DPS builds do not. DPS builds take a huge damage decrease from using some of these builds. And primarily I'm talking about Negotiator's Dilemma 3-piece and the Striker 3-piece, okay? Now, 15% crit chance and 20% crit damage may seem really good, but you have to factor in the attributes that you're actually losing compared to other gear pieces. You have to factor in the brand set bonuses that you are losing with those pieces. And this goes the same way with the 15% rate of fire increase from Striker. It is a good boost. It's nice, but it is designed specifically for that set and the 4-piece, so you can build up your stacks a lot quicker. If you are not using 4-piece Striker, that 15%, basically the closest thing I can say is it is a 15% amplified damage modifier. That's kind of the closest way I could say it. It's not exactly like that, but for most damage purposes, that's what it's similar to. However, when you are losing a bunch of crit chance, crit damage, or whatever, you have to sacrifice other things. You have to put crit chance onto other pieces that would normally have crit damage on them, or you have to use brand sets just to get crit chance because you don't have enough, then at the end result, you are losing extra amounts of damage that you could have if you just used all, high-end gear, basically. This isn't just my opinion. This is what the math says, and this is pretty much what the developers have said. They had no intention for players to basically be using the 3-piece bonuses. They were not designed that way. They were designed to basically be used only as 4-piece sets. That's pretty much it. So if you guys want to believe your 3-piece build is the best build ever, go ahead. You can argue with me all you want, but you're not right. The math says you are wrong. So I'm just going to leave it at that. If you don't believe me, figure out how to do the math yourself. Anyway, what I ended up doing was just playing around with different pieces of gear. Now, I've been working on my own DPS build basically because I've been kind of using the same exact one since, TU8 came out. I haven't really changed much on it, haven't really updated. I'm using the same kind of generic setup that a lot of people are. And mostly because I don't normally play DPS builds because I don't really have that much fun playing a DPS specific build. But I have been looking to upgrade my DPS build, and I wanted to know what exactly is the best, what should I be getting, what should I be aiming for, because obviously knowing what's the best helps me target the loot that I actually want to farm instead of just hoping and praying. So that's the reason I did this. I wanted to find out the best pieces for me to get for a DPS build. Now when you're talking about DPS builds, there are two things that I really just can't pass up, to talk about, or at least to correct. Now, the first one is damage to armor. I've seen a few incidents of people running full max, damage to armor builds, thinking that that was a very great way to just melt players' armor in PvP. The issue is that damage to armor is not some sort of special stat. It is a multiplier of your damage, yes. It is multiplicative, yes. But if you don't stack multiple multiplicative bonuses, you don't really get the overall bonus that you want. So in the case of running 3 Araldi, the Contractor's Gloves, and 2 Walker and Harris, and having damage to armor rolled on your assault rifle, for example, you're not getting a huge bonus from it. You are going to get a good amount of non-crit body damage, right? I mean, you can get a good amount of damage compared to a lot of other builds. In this case, comparing just these two, the full crit damage to the damage to armor build, yeah, your non-crit body shots are going to be doing about 25% more damage. That's great. I mean, that's just, yeah, it's good. But those are only 40% of your total damage. So you also need to factor in those 60% of shots that are going to be crits. And in this case, you can see, compared to the crit damage build, I'm not hitting that hard for my crits. So it eventually catches up to it, where I'm just not building the multiplier enough to actually get this massive amount of damage that I want. And this is the problem. When you specialize heavily into one specific stat, you don't get the returns that you would actually want to have on a damage build. Now I guess I should back up for a second, because the way that I tested these things was based off of my current build. So swapping in and out pieces of my current build, or at least theoretical pieces for, max rolls, to see what I could get. What basically the pinnacle of what it would be. Now on my current build, I do have vigilance, so I am adding 25% total weapon damage. Basically assuming that I would roll vigilance onto any of these pieces. I'm also assuming that I would be basically using the same weapon, which is an AKM. Now the AKM only has 2 slots that you can add basically crit chance or crit damage to. So there are other weapons that you could maybe add a little bit more crit damage to it, or add a little bit more crit chance to it. Basically take off some of the negatives of certain sets. But for my purposes, for the amount of damage that I was doing, I figured that the AKM is a very good thing to look at in terms of the total damage that you can actually get out of it. Now the other thing you may be looking at is, well, why do you not have 60% crit chance on these builds? And that's because if I did try to get 60, I would lose a lot of crit damage to do that. And basically, it would end up dropping the damage that I'm doing. So to get that 60% would require just me basically just dropping the DPS, which wasn't worth it. My total DPS that I'm looking at is much better with slightly more crit damage and just a tiny reduction in my crit chance. Either way, the total returns, even with that investment of crit damage, still isn't really that good compared to other sets that do have 60%. So again, just to make it clear, just because your build has over 200% crit damage doesn't mean jack poopy. Just because your build has over 20% damage to armor doesn't mean a thing. It's not that important because it doesn't build on multiplicative stacking. Now, the first build that I took a look at was pretty much a very common one that I've seen, a lot in PvP and especially in PvE. Coyote Mask, 2 Providence, Contractor's Gloves, a Fenris, and a Fox's Prayer. Now, if I maxed out those pieces and basically just tried to put the best rolls in the best slot, meaning min-maxing my build appropriately and getting the best returns from it, what I'm looking at is about 140% weapon damage, 60% crit chance, 166 crit damage, 18% target out of cover, 8% damage to armor, 25% total weapon damage with that vigilance. Like I said, you're going to see that with every piece on the build. My damage numbers are actually, compared to those other two, are really good. Now I'm going to hit a body crit for 706k. I'm going to hit a non-crit body hit for 265k. Now for PvP, I think you're doing about 30 to 40% damage with an AR, which means that crit body shot would be about 300k. Now the second one I checked out is another common one: 3 Providence, 1 Fenris, 1 Grupo, 1 Cheska. And obviously the reason that you would use a Providence over a Coyote is in case you are fighting at a longer range. If you are fighting past 15 meters, yes, 15% from Providence will beat 10% from Coyote. But looking at it, 140% weapon damage, 60% crit chance. Now, there is excessive crit on this build. It's about 5 or so percent, I think. And that's because, obviously, I am stacking 2 10% crit chance with the brand sets. Now, this gives you the opportunity to basically roll one of those things into whatever you want. You could probably roll it into, headshot or weapon handling. That's really up to you, but that's not really one of the factors that I'm taking into consideration here. So that's why I just kind of marked it there as excess crit. Now, my crit damage is going to be 195%. My target out of cover is going to be 10%, and I'm also going to get 25% total weapon damage, accounting for that vigilance. This time, my body crits were 676k, but my body hits were 229k. You can see that is a very significant drop compared to what I was getting from the previous build. And this is the reason why I'm taking a look at it, because these kind of things are huge indicators of what is important. As you can see, having massive amounts of crit damage are not always the most important thing. That 8% target out of cover and that 8% damage to armor definitely made a huge difference, especially if I was shooting at players. Where on a normal DPS build, 75% of their actual life is going to be armor. And in case you're dealing with tanks with bonus armor, yeah, it's going to be an even larger percentage of their actual life. So yes, damage to armor definitely is important, especially in PvP. Now in PvE, it's really up to you how much damage to armor you want, whether you think it's important or not. And that can be debated, but this is what I'm testing out. This is what I'm looking at. I'm not specifically looking for reasons why you might use, damage to health, for example. I'm looking at these numbers that are the most common, especially for PvP players. Now the next build here is actually what I'm currently working on for my DPS build. And that is a 1 Coyote, 2 Providence, Contractor's Gloves, 1 Fenris, and a Grupo. Now you can see here, if I did manage to get everything maxed out on my build, I would be doing 140% weapon damage, 60% crit chance. I would have 196 crit damage, and of course the 10% target out of cover, the 8% damage to armor, and the 25% total weapon damage. Now with these numbers, that would give me body crits of 733k. That would also give me body hits of 247k. Now obviously it's not the best body hit. The first build that I went over is definitely better with that area. But I am doing more crit damage. So it's roughly about 27k more on a crit versus 18k less on a non-crit hit. So yeah, that is definitely a damage boost on that build. But of course, as I was in the process of this build, trying to figure out, well, is there something even better? Is there a different build that could be even stronger than that? And yes, honestly, there is a better build. Now, if I could get this build, which I am working on trying to get these pieces as well, what the build would provide is 145% weapon damage, 60% crit chance, 193 crit damage, 10% target out of cover, 8% damage to armor, and 25% total weapon damage. Now, A lot of people think that crit damage is much more important than weapon damage. But the fact is, that 5% weapon damage gets increased by everything after it. So the more weapon damage you have, the more crit damage you can do. The more target out of cover you can do, the more damage to armor you can do, the more total weapon damage you can do. Every time something increases, it increases everywhere else. So it is definitely good to have that walker for the 5%. If you had this maxed out, your body crits would be 740k. Your non-crit hits would be 252k. So more crit damage than the build I currently have, more non-crit damage than the build I currently have. I did not think Walker and Harris would really be that important, but it turns out that at 5% is actually very important. So don't sleep on it. And another reason for this is because while Providence Defense is good and very popular, the first piece that you get is only for headshot damage. And if you happen to be on PC, headshot damage, yeah, that's great. The fact is, though, most players are on console, and most console players do not specifically aim for the head and the head alone, which means that headshot damage isn't always the most reliable source of damage, and you might not actually get any benefit from it. Now, like I said, the best build is based on what gear you actually have. If you don't have the gear to make it, or your rolls on these specific pieces are not min-maxed, they're not freaking, God rolled everything, then you can't make these kinds of builds. You can't get these kinds of returns. So it really is up to you to kind of, figure out where you actually want to go with your build. What can you change? What can you swap out for a greater return? So if you take anything from this video, I want you to understand that just because you get more crit damage from something does not make it the best in slot. It is dependent on your entire build. If you have to sacrifice crit chance to get more crit damage, or you have to sacrifice crit damage to get more crit chance, then you can run into issues. You want everything to kind of be min-maxed in a proper order. I understand I didn't go into every single build, and honestly, I'm not going to. I mean, there's just so many different variations on builds that you could have. I do hope that this provided you with some indication of where you should go. Obviously, we all want to min-max our builds. We all want something better. We all want to improve the things that we have, right? No one's playing this game running the same stuff they've had for a year. Maybe there's some people doing that. But most of us want to get better. We want to get better stuff. We want to improve our build. We want to reach the next build that'll be even better than our current build. But alright guys, that'll do it for me. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.